Hey freshmen, Mulaney here. I am going to walk you through part of these notes on Genesis 3 through 11. I am planning on getting us through part of it in class, specifically Genesis 3, so all of Roman numeral 1 here, and part of Roman numeral 2, specifically letter A. So Roman numeral 1 through Roman numeral 2, letter A, I'm going to get us through in class. That means we're going to pick it up here, letter B. I'm going to move fast, I'm going to skip some stuff, really just prioritize the really important stuff. So here we go. This is Genesis 4 through 5, letter B. We're talking about Cain killing Abel. Cain has killed Abel, and now God is sentencing him or giving him a punishment, or basically saying what's going to happen now because you killed your brother. And it makes sense in a way, because Cain killed his brother. He has broken this stable connection to family. Now he's going to be cursed to wander from place to place. He won't be able to farm like he used to, which is a sign of stability. And he becomes the first nomad in Scripture, and that's not a good thing in the Israelites' point of view. In the ancient Israelite worldview, nomads were not to be trusted because they just went from place to place. They didn't have a stable place to call home. It just made them fundamentally untrustworthy. Not saying that's true, but this is how the Israelites saw it. And so, yeah, etiology. This is an example of an etiology, a story or a detail that's meant to explain where something comes from. So in this case, where do nomads come from? Oh, well, they're all descendants of Cain, the first murderer. So you see how this works, right? Like, this thing that we don't like or trust, where does it come from? Oh, this bad thing that we're going to connect it to. So, yeah, not all etiologies are bad, right? So some other examples of etiologies would be Noah and the flood, right? This is, where do rainbows come from? Oh, it comes from God making this promise to Noah and his family. The Tower of Babel is an etiology for different languages. The story of Cain and Abel can be seen as an etiology for, where nomads come from. Genesis 5, let's just skip. It's really boring. Genesis 6 through 9, so the story of Noah and the flood and the ark. Here's an awesome painting of it. I like it because it's all red and chaotic in the front, and yeah, it's not until you really start looking in the back center that you notice, oh, the ark. So everyone's freaking out because the rain has begun, and the ark is all tranquil and peaceful blues, and yeah, it seems like there's a shaft of light illuminating it. So, something to notice, in this story, it is the story of the first covenant in Scriptures. At the end of it, God says to Noah and his family, I will never flood the earth again. This is my covenant with you. And so a covenant is a really important idea in Scripture. God enters into these sacred agreements or promises with a number of individuals. So Noah is the first one. Later, we'll learn about the covenant with Abraham, and he'll renew that covenant with Abraham's descendants all the way to Moses, where he makes a covenant with all of the Israelites, all of Abraham's descendants. So it's this form of relationship where God is making a promise, and this first covenant is super basic. It is, don't worry, I won't ever do that again. Which you might think, oh, gee, thanks, God. That really broke the bank on that one. Really overextended yourself there. But think of this in terms of, since Adam and Eve, no one has really been close with God. No one has been in close relationship with God. Noah, it says, is walks upright and is blameless, but yeah, it doesn't say anything about the quality of his connection with God. So it might be possible that even Noah doesn't really know God that well. What's the first thing you need in a relationship in order for you to grow close to someone? You need to know that they're not out to get you. They aren't trying to hurt you. They're not trying to gather information to use against you. They're not your enemy. So in the order of relationship, this first covenant makes total sense. And it's going to get more and more demanding as time goes on. So, yeah, there's a double rainbow, which if you've never heard the song, I encourage you to watch. Yeah, just YouTube double rainbow. It's amazing. All right, so 2 etiologies to look at in this story. First one is, rainbows. This is where rainbows come from. Second one is weird. This is a weird detail of the story. Most people don't know it, but it's troubling when you think about it. So, this is the end of the story. After Noah and his family get off the ark, Noah plants the first vineyard, gets drunk, like you do, and yeah, he does. It's not really his fault either, because he's the first one to grow grapes to make wine, and so he doesn't know he's alcoholic. He gets drunk, and yeah, he, like some drunk people do, gets naked and falls asleep in his tent. His brothers, Ham notices it, but doesn't do anything except tell his brothers, Shem and Japheth. So Shem and Japheth go in and cover their father's nakedness, and then Noah wakes up, sobers up, and is like, "What did Ham do?" And curses Ham by cursing Ham's son, Canaan, saying like Canaan will serve his brothers and be his brother's slaves. And the land of Canaan, background information you should know here, is the land that will eventually become the land known as the Promised Land. It's the area that the Israelites come to occupy and call their own, that God promises to them. So the Canaanites are this group that the Israelites, not in this story, but when this story was written down, the Israelites had a long history of fighting with the Canaanites. They did not get along. And yeah, this is another etiology here. This is an etiology of why Canaanites are shameful. And it's because they're all descendants of Ham, who saw Noah's nakedness and did nothing except gossip about it. You should also read the footnotes to this little weird episode, because it describes how this story is suggesting that maybe something happened between Ham and Noah, something weird and sexual. And it's because the Canaanites apparently had some very strange and messed up, it seems, sexual practices as part of their religious practices, involving possibly incest. It's not clear, but it seems like these details are pointing at some messed up sexual practices of the Canaanites. And so that's becoming part of the story here too. So that's why Canaanites are shameful, because their ancestor did something shameful with Noah. All right. Foreshadowing, we can cover this, or we don't have to cover this. Archetype, prefiguration, it's just another word for allegory. Don't worry about that. Last part, Tower of Babel, and I guess before that, the Table of Nations. Really quick, Roman numeral 4, letter A, Table of Nations. It's this, I think, most boring chapter in all of the Bible. It's, just here are all the descendants of Noah's sons. And it lists literally all the peoples that the Israelites knew about. So, you can make a rough map of everyone. So Ham, by the way, remember Ham? Ham gets the credit of not only the Canaanites, but the Egyptians, who will later enslave the Israelites. So some bad blood. Yeah, there are 70 nations, or 72, depending on how you translate it. And that becomes symbolic for every nation on earth, as we learned in Mass Boot Camp. The takeaway here is, even as Scripture reflects the prejudices of the Israelites, as does every culture's stories, right? You can't help but be a product of your time. Still, even though there are all these prejudices and biases baked into the text, in the text too, there's an understanding that we are one human family, that we all descended from the same ancestors at the end of the day. And in the Old Testament even, we see hints that God is going to try and reunite everyone as one family. And that becomes explicit in the New Testament, where the church tries to bring everyone together. Tower of Babel. I hated this story growing up. I used to think, God is so mean. He's like a bully at the beach in those cartoons where those big bullies on like the beach side, they'll knock down people's sandcastles because they're getting too pretty or too big, whatever it is. God just seems like a mean bully knocking down the nice Tower of Babel. But I did not, in my children's Bible version of this story, does not get at the depth of what's happening here. So, this is actually a pretty messed up thing that they're building. This tower is not just like, oh, let's build a tall tower. This is built because the people want to, one, make sure that they are not scattered across the earth, and two, so that they can be remembered. They're explicitly trying to control people's movements and trying to force uniformity by doing that. But then also they're trying to make a name for themselves, get glory for themselves. This is the essential task of every empire. This is imperialism in the Bible. The people building the Tower of Babel is the first example of imperialism, or in general, a social sin. Social sin as opposed to personal sin, which learn about in the first part of these notes with Cain and Abel in class. Social sin is a sin for which it's collective responsibility. It's not an individual's fault, but rather, and it's not an individual's responsibility to change it. It's everyone's responsibility to change it and fix it. So here are 3 examples of modern-day social sins. One would be the continued use of the death penalty in developed nations. So, like in America. The church would say, it's no longer necessary to use the death penalty, given the way that we can build prisons. We shouldn't use it. It would be wrong to continue using it when it's not necessary, or it's against the gospel. Legalized abortion. So this would be, laws allowing abortion. That would be, especially in a democracy, something that we all have to work to change. Moreover, work to change so that no woman feels pressured to have an abortion by circumstances, or poverty or lack of opportunity. That would be collective responsibility. And then my favorite little hobby horse is unjust working conditions for people, especially who make clothes. But this is an example of a sweatshop in this picture, where people are paid very little, often in unsafe conditions, working super long hours to make cheap clothes that we can buy. yeah, at crazy low prices, fast fashion. You can tell that your clothes were made likely in a sweatshop or a similar environment if your clothes were made in any country that doesn't have very just labor laws. So basically any undeveloped nation or developing nation. Yeah, a newspaper article I recently saw did a research into people who make toys for Fisher-Price and Disney, and it was like a $35 or 35 euros, so $45 Little Mermaid toy. For putting it together, a person made about a penny in China. So, yeah, that's more toys at Christmas, but at what cost? Collective responsibility to fix it. So the let me go back here. Sorry, that's Spotify. Okay, here we go. The picture here in the painting of somebody bowing to like what seems to be a king. You can tell that this project is not just free people freely deciding, let's build a tower. We need to control people's movements. We need to control what they're doing, force uniformity on them, and we need to make a name for ourselves. We have to be great. That is imperialism. So this is the Tower of Babel. It's not good that this tower is being built. So God stops it. And this is an example of irony, right? So when what happens is the opposite of what's expected. The people of Babel, they expected by building this tower, we won't be scattered. And what happens as a result of building this tower? God comes down and scatters them and confuses their language. So, yeah, it's a perfect example of irony. It's also a great lesson about all social sin in general, but usually the thing that we're trying to get through social sin, it will give us the opposite. All right, last part. Why is it called Babel? It's a pun or like a burn on the Babylonians. So the Babylonians, remember, have exiled the Israelites when they're writing the story, and they would have seen the towers that the Babylonians built called ziggurats, and yeah, it's more like Tower of Babylon, more like Tower of Babylon, Babylon. Yeah, it's hard to get in translation, but basically saying they're so confused, they're so jumbled, and that is how I leave you on these notes with a bad pun.